Good morning. It is great to be here. My name is Andrew Pudua, and I am the founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing. And this is very auspicious because it was almost exactly 20 years ago, right now, that I gave the first rendition of the seminar Teaching Writing, Structure and Style, which is what we're doing together today. And as you can imagine, I have learned a lot of things in 20 years of doing this. And so it is a great privilege and a great blessing to have you with me today as we begin to represent this to the world. I always like to give people a little bit of history about this course, this system, the structure and style, just so they do not erroneously think that it is something that I created. I am nowhere near intelligent enough to have done that. I happen to be blessed to learn it and get kind of good at teaching it and made a career out of that. But the history is this. I was working at a small school in Montana in 1990. And there was a Canadian teacher who was there teaching at the school with us, and she was aware of a course called the Blended Soundsight Program of Learning, which was taught in northern Alberta each summer as an 11-day teacher training course. She was very, very excited and gung-ho about this system and using it in her classroom, and so she persuaded this school to send all the faculty to take this course. So I went up there with a team of teachers from that little school in Montana, and we kind of divided into two groups. One group took the primary reading writing course from Mrs. Anna Ingham, and I was part of a group that took the blended structure and style and composition segment from Dr. James B. Webster. And I learned these ideas, these models and techniques. I came back and taught in the 7th, 8th grade classroom, and the results were excellent. Surprised me, surprised the kids, surprised the parents. It worked so well. And after that year, I thought I could learn more. So I went to Canada another time to take that same 11-day course from Dr. Webster again, learn more, came back, changed my situation a little bit, started doing some tutoring and some private classes, ran a preschool, but I kept teaching the writing, and I thought, I really would go back again, and it wasn't that expensive, so I went up a third time, and they said, if you're going to keep coming back, we're going to put you to work. So I became Dr. Webster's assistant and then kind of protege, and I went up many years, I think 7 or 8 years I went and helped teach the program in northern Canada. I am not Canadian, although I kind of feel like an honorary Canadian. But Dr. Webster is a fascinating man. He is a professor, retired now, of African history. And he lived and worked in Africa for 16 years. And after that, he came back to Nova Scotia, took up a teaching post at Dalhousie University in Halifax, and quickly discovered that the students coming to him at the university level had, in his view, substandard writing skills, that they really didn't know how to write well enough to do history well. And so he kind of resurrected some of the ideas that he had developed when he was much younger, teaching in elementary, middle, and high schools, organized them with some of Mrs. Ingham's ideas from the Blended Soundsight program, and then put it all together in a system. And he started to teach this system to his university students, kind of giving them a little mini 10-minute lecture on how to write a paper well before the history lectures. And his system kind of worked like this. If you would start out, he would teach you all the things on the level 1 checklist, which had 32 things you had to do in every paper for Webster's class. If you could get a B- or better on that, you would graduate to the level 2 checklist, which had 82 things that you had to do for the paper in Webster's class. And if you could get a B- or better on that, you would graduate to the level 3 checklist, which had 88 things you had to do for Webster's class. And if you could get a B- or better on that, well, you were a pretty good writer. So word got around Dalhousie University that if you wanted to learn to write well, you wouldn't mess with the English department, you would take African history. Which caused a bit of a political problem in the history department because the other history people didn't understand why is there such a boom of interest in African history in Nova Scotia in the 1970s. But Dr. Webster began helping his aunt, Mrs. Ingham, teach and administer this blended sound site course that she had been doing for years while he was in Africa, and he then took these ideas that he had kind of organized for the university level and geared them down for use at the elementary, middle, and high school level. And that's what I learned from him in the early 90s. Unfortunately, Mrs. Ingham has passed on. Dr. Webster is very, very retired. I still see him usually a couple times a year. We've worked on many projects together. But this wonderful blended sound site program course, 11 days in the middle of nowhere in northern Alberta, is no longer. But we at Institute for Excellence in Writing have been working very hard to preserve Mrs. Ingham's legacy, to preserve Dr. Webster's work, and that is what you are here to experience today. So I like to give that little bit of history so that credit is given where credit is due, and people don't erroneously think that somehow Andrew Pudewa thought of all this stuff, because, as I said, I'm not nearly that smart. Now, we do have a couple problems when it comes to the teaching of writing to children, to anyone, but particularly to children. I think the first thing we notice is that there's a very broad aptitude spectrum. Have you noticed this? That on one end, you've got a child, often a girl, not always, but this child can start a story, and she can just whip out her notebook and start writing, and she can go on, page after page after page, and you read it, and it goes on, page after page after page, and you're not quite sure how to help her make it better, but whew, does she have aptitude. She can put words on paper, and that's a wonderful thing. That's a blessing. On the other end of the spectrum, you have, not always, but often, a boy who would rather scrub all the floors in the building twice than put an entire paragraph on paper. It is so painful. It is so stressful. It is so overwhelming that he would prefer any other form of torture to that. Some of you have experience. And our problem, of course, is if we have more than probably 2 children in our group, we've got kids at different places on this spectrum, and what we discover that works for one may or may not work for the other. Now, I feel that Webster's syllabus here, the structural models and stylistic techniques checklist, stands squarely in the middle and reaches out to help both these ends, because we will give some order to this great spewing of words onto paper so that it will come into a form that will be more intelligent and enjoyable to read. And we will give this little guy who struggles, we'll give him the model, the content, the checklist. He'll be able to just put the pieces together like a Lego kit and have success. So this spectrum, I think you'll see how it'll work for everybody. In this room, we probably have people on both the reluctant writer kind of edge, as well as the I write in my spare time for fun types of people who I can't really personally relate to, but I know you're out there. The other thing we see, I think, that is a challenge when teaching writing is the curricular materials. Again, there's a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you have the language arts workbook, right? This usually tries to do everything all in one: grammar, handwriting, vocabulary, spelling, and it usually comes in the grade 3 flavor, the grade 4 flavor, the grade 5 flavor, and it has page after page of exercises where you can fill in the blank and do multiple choice and a lot of grammar, vernacular manipulation kind of stuff. But when it comes to writing, not a lot of help is necessarily given. One that I'm familiar with in the 3rd grade says, write a paragraph about your best friend, be sure to include 3 details. So then when the student writes, my best friend is named Johnny and he is really fun and cool, period. That's not a paragraph. I included 3 details. You need more. You see how that could be so fuzzy and frustrating? Then, on the other end of the spectrum is what you might find, say, in the teacher supply stores. You've been in these stores where you wade through racks and racks of stickers and posters and psychedelically colored pencils and little dinosaur erasers. You finally get to the books, they're on the back. And you find one on writing and you pull it off and you open it up and it has things like this. Pretend you are a newspaper reporter and report on an event that happened in your home or school recently. And it has a little place for a headline and a byline and kind of a faux column, looks like a newspaper print thing. And the purpose of this book, of course, is to help the child figure out something to write about. Because that is kind of the defining problem, isn't it? In so many cases. If you meet a child who does not like to write, how many of you have met a child who does not like writing? And you ask them, why don't you like writing? After you get past the tautology of because it's hard, because I don't like it, and you find something substantive, it's usually, I don't know what to write. I can't think of anything. That's very often the block. And it shouldn't really surprise us because children are different, you know. One thing that's kind of clear is that they don't have as much life experience, right? They've only been sentient, self-aware human beings for a short period of time. They're not like old people like us who have, well, not all of you, who have decades of thinking and reading and discussing and travel. We've got a lot more in there. Kids just don't have all that much in there quite yet. So it's harder for them to come up with the content. The other thing is that children think differently than we do. Have you noticed this? We can pretty easily think about next week, next month, next year, something on the other side of the world, an abstract concept, right? Children are pretty much always thinking about what? Right now. Yes. Just tell me what to do and I will do it so I can get done with it and be outside and make forts, which is the real purpose of life when you're 10 years old, right? To get done with things and get outside. So, again, Webster's syllabus stands squarely in the middle here because we will teach actually quite a bit of grammar and language skills or arts of language. I'm going to teach a bunch of grammar, but I like to say we do it surreptitiously. We kind of sneak it in on you, right? For example, it is easier to do a subordinate adverb clause than to say those 3 words when you're 10 years old. So what we will do is we'll end up teaching a lot of grammar in the context of immediate application and use, rather than trying to just identify things. But we will also address this other problem of content. How do we begin? By removing the problem of I don't know what to write about. If you turn to page 7 in your binder, this would be before the first tab, page 7, you will see this chart. These are the structural models, the 9 units of Webster's syllabus. And what you'll notice here is that in Unit 1 and 2, we will begin by giving children a source text and having them make a keyword outline from a source text. So we're going to give them a little bit of content, an Aesop fable, a little bit of interesting information about an animal or a person or an event, something that is already there. They will then learn to make a keyword outline from that and then tell back at first verbally and then in writing that content. So we will remove the problem of what to write about so that we can get into the business of learning how to write well. So Unit 1 and 2 here are kind of together in that you don't have to stop doing one while you start doing the other, and I'll explain that. And what we suggest is that you work through these 9 units over the course of a school year. Now, this would be probably applicable to, say, approximately 4th to 8th grade. If you have younger students, you can go a little bit slower. If you have older students, you can go a little bit faster. But the 1-a-month schedule seems to work very nicely. So if your school year starts in September, we'll just say since most people do, then you could start in September with this idea of giving them a little source text where they will take the keywords from each sentence, giving it first an oral summary, and then moving on into Unit 2 where they would write out the content from the keywords. However, we can't stop there. We can't think that's the whole thing, because what we have to do is get them to the point where we can say, write about this, write about that, tell what you think, tell what your opinion, make up a story. So you'll see that this path really leads children in that direction. Unit 3 is summarizing narrative stories or retelling stories. Again, they don't have to think up their own story, but we give them a tool called the story sequence chart, and then they make a keyword outline from that. I have a lot of personal empathy for children who struggle with thinking up stuff, because I really didn't like writing in school, and I particularly remember the problem of stories. You know, the teacher would come and say, okay, children, today we're going to write stories, and you can write anything you want. You just get to make it up. And for me, that was just horrible, because I would get, once upon a time, there was and then just blank. Because I had this belief that somehow I had to think of something that nobody ever thought of before. That I had to come up with a completely original idea, and it was so bad. I remember one case where I had started this story, once upon a time there was and tears were just dripping on my paper. I don't know what to write. So I have personally a lot of empathy for children in that. Now, not all children are like that. Some are naturally more creative than others, and they've got that idea. But this would have fit my character perfectly, because, okay, you don't have to make up a whole new story. You can just retell an existing one, and in the process, learn how stories work. Learn how to tell stories. And of course, if it were illegal to retell existing stories, well, then we'd have to put C.S. Lewis, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and the entire Disney Corporation in jail, right? So, Unit 3, very important unit here. Then we go back to content that is perhaps a little bit more factual in Unit 4, summarizing a reference. Now, I actually liked writing reports in school because I found it very easy. All you had to do was open the encyclopedia, read till you find a pretty good sentence, copy that sentence, and change a word or two, if you could. Then you would read till you find another pretty good sentence, copy that sentence, change a couple words, read, copy, change, until you had enough. I liked that. I always did very well on that, of course. But I did have 2 distinct thoughts. One, what I am doing here is probably illegal, because the teacher would always say, put it in your own words. Don't copy from the source. Put it in your own words. Of course, I felt completely justified in my crime because I didn't own any words. And it wasn't fair because the encyclopedia already got the good ones. The other distinct thought I had was, this is really kind of a stupid thing to do. If anyone actually wanted to know about Japan, they should just read the darn encyclopedia. Why make me copy it? I suspect that maybe some of you grew up having similar thoughts. But what we'll be teaching in Unit 4 then is kind of the reverse of the process. Not how to copy a whole sentence and change a couple words, but to choose certain facts that are interesting, important, and relevant, copy a few words, and then continue building the student's ability to change whole sentences using the stylistic techniques. Then we go on, and if you're on the one-a-month schedule then, in October, you can do a month of stories. In November, you can go back to the summarizing references. I have noticed December is a tough month education-wise. Have you noticed that? So I just kind of mentally bundle together, December and January. If you get one good month out of those two, you're probably doing pretty well. But this is back kind of on the more imaginative, creative side, because here we're going to give children some pictures and a method of extracting ideas from those pictures. So they're still putting outlines into keywords, but they're asking questions about the pictures. Again, this would have been horrible for me. If you gave me a picture of a guy in a boat and said, write about it, I would have wrote, once upon a time there was a guy in a boat. And then there would have been a very long, painful silence. But now, because I've learned the trick, I could spin it out for as long as you want, because I have learned the trick of asking questions about the pictures, and so I could keep extracting content. This is kind of an important weaning unit because it essentially stands between the dictated content, the story per se, and then the blank page for inventive or creative writing. So Unit 5 is kind of in the middle there, very strategically. Unit 6 is one of my favorites, summarizing multiple references. This would be that research idea where you have not just one source with too many facts, but multiple sources with too many facts. And how do you extract facts from multiple sources and then create a fused outline? Kind of like that whole note card project, but in microcosm. I think you're going to love this Unit 6 because it takes something that was kind of overwhelming or confusing to so many of us and shrinks it into a very manageable, easy to learn and teach process. So that's the difference there. February, nice to be inside and do research anyway, because in most parts it's too cold to make forts outside. Although I guess you can make snow forts. Unit 7 is inventive writing. Sometimes we call creative writing, although creative writing is a big word that has a lot of kind of baggage attached to it. What we're really just trying to say is, right here in Unit 7, there's no external source. This is just you, your brain, and whatever you happen to carry around in it, and that's all you get. You will notice that many writing programs kind of start here. They say, you have to think of something in order to learn to write. Whereas what we have discovered, and it's so exciting, is that actually by giving children content and teaching them the how to write, they also are improving their skills in how to think. And so that's why this comes a little bit later. I was teaching this course one time, and a teacher said, so are you saying that the kids aren't doing any real writing until March? And I thought, well, it's all real writing, but that kind of showed that perspective. Like, it's not real unless it comes out of you. And what I find so brilliant is that the process here starts by increasingly challenging questions. The first question here is, what are the key words in each sentence of this text? That's not a hard question, but you do have to ask the question. Then the question here is, what are the key elements of the story? That's not a hard question, but it's a little bit harder, and you have to ask the question to do the activity. Here, over here, we're asking, what are the interesting, important, or relevant ideas, and how do you organize those? And Unit 5, then, we're looking at, okay, here's a set of pictures. Now, let's get the habit. Who, what, where, why, when, how. What are they thinking, saying, doing? What could be outside the picture? What could be hidden in the picture? You have to have the skill of asking these questions, do you see? And so down here, then, you're using the skill of asking yourself questions to get information out of your brain. That's actually called thinking, right? And we'll talk more about that later. Now, Unit 8, we have several different essay models. That's why it's plural. We have the basic 5-paragraph, the expanded 6-7 paragraph, the expanded essay with expanded topics, the super essay, the persuasive essay. We have lots of different models for essays. But the thing that's interesting is that this is where these two tracks kind of come together, right? On one side, you're learning how to collect up, organize, and present facts. On the other side, you're learning how to say what you think. And in the essay, that's what differentiates an essay from a report, right? Is you're not only giving facts, you're telling what you think about those facts. Now, some people write essays without facts, but that's just obnoxious. So the idea of having both is so critical. So really, this is kind of the climax here, where these two tracks come together. And if you're on the 1-a-month schedule, you can do essays in April and critiques in May, and it works very nicely through the school year. The critiques are essentially a replacement for the kind of traditional book report. We use the word critique because it just sounds more romantic, doesn't it? I mean, who wants to write a book report? But a critique, that sounds like you get to criticize, which is something that a lot of kids really enjoy doing. Have you noticed? And we have a model that starts with the idea of using the Unit 3 story summary, adding in an introduction that gives some background, author information, and a conclusion that tells what you think about that story. We also have developed off that Unit 9 models some writing about literature, response to literature and literary analysis, and so we're going to be adding that into the Unit 9 at the end of the seminar as well. So these are the 9 units. Like I said, if you're in this range, say 4th, maybe 3rd, 4th, 8th, 9th, I think the 1 a month is a very good schedule. Younger children, 2nd grade, maybe 6 to 8 weeks, and you only get through, say, Unit 4 or 5. With high school students, you want to maybe do more faster because you feel your time is going quickly, and you wouldn't have to spend a whole month on Units 1, 2, 3, 4. You could maybe do 2 or 3 weeks and then have more time for more essays, researcher essays or inventive writing at the end. So it's flexible, but that 1 month guideline is helpful to keep you moving through. Now, sometimes people who take this course get the feeling that this is really different than what I learned myself, either in school as a student, or many of you have elementary education degrees or practice or experience there, and this is kind of different or new. I even had one teacher one time said, it seems like cheating. You know, it seems like you're giving them too much help or something, you know. But what's interesting is, it is not new, and it is not cheating. It is actually very, very old. In fact, if you go way back, more than 2,000 years ago, and look at how rhetoric, speaking and writing, was taught back then, there was this system of exercises called the progymnasmata. These were the exercises to train rhetoric. The very first one was, guess what? Retell a fable. Then they had other exercises like take a long thing and make it short. Summarize a reference. Take a short thing and make it long. Be more creative. Argue a point. Persuasive essay. So it's interesting how this parallels, but this idea of starting with a source text is not new. It's very old. In fact, many well-known authors through history have used this themselves. I was in my office one day, this is a few years ago, and my daughter Genevieve came rushing into my office. She was probably 15 at the time, and she said, Dad, have you read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography? And I said, well, probably, but it's been a long time, so don't ask me any hard questions. And she said, no, Daddy, you should read this. Look right here, because this is how you taught me to write. And I read it, and I was much amazed with it, because it was very, very similar to Unit 1 and 2, taking keywords from a sentence and then reconstructing the text. So if you turn to page 8, we'll just read this together, because I think there's some bits of wisdom to be gleaned from it. 3 or 4 letters of aside had passed when my father happened to find my papers and read them. Without entering into the discussion, he took occasion to talk to me about the manner of my writing, observed that, although I had the advantage of my antagonist in correct spelling and pointing, which I owed to the printing house, I fell far short in elegance of expression, in method and in perspicuity, of which he convinced me by several instances. I saw the justice of his remark, and thence grew more attentive to the manner in writing, and determined to endeavor at improvement. Wouldn't it be great if all students had this attitude? Our life would be so much easier. About this time, I met with an odd volume of The Spectator. It was the third. I had never before seen any of them. I bought it, read it over and over, and was much delighted with it. I thought the writing excellent and wished, if possible, to imitate it. With this view, I took some of the papers, and making short hints of the sentiment in each sentence, laid them by a few days, and then, without looking at the book, tried to complete the papers again by expressing each hinted sentiment at length and as fully as it had been expressed before in any suitable words that should come to hand. Isn't that interesting? I mean, that's exactly what I have described to you. We give the kids a little source text, take the keywords, the short hints, put the original aside, and try to reproduce that content. See, Franklin somehow knew that if he was going to improve his skill in writing, he needed something to imitate. And this is true because anytime we try to learn a skill, it's based on imitation. So if you want to learn a sport, you have to watch people and do that and be coached. If you want to learn to play an instrument, you have to see how someone does that and try to imitate them. That's the thing. So Franklin somehow instinctively knew that if he was going to improve his writing, he needed something to imitate. See, one of the interesting and kind of frustrating things is that if you do what you can do, but you only do what you can do, you will only be able to do that which you can already do because that's all you can do. Did you follow that? But if you have something that you cannot do, that you can see and aspire to, and you try to imitate that, then you will get better. And that's what the whole process of learning a skill is about. But unfortunately, we've lost our understanding of the value of imitation in many cases in modern education, and it's become much more about self-expression and creativity. I will have people say to me, well, I just want my child to be able to express himself, right? And we get this idea that writing is about self-expression. But really, writing is about expressing ideas. Now, it is possible that sometime in your life, you could have an original idea. It is possible, if you live long enough. I've kind of given up on it because I've realized any idea I ever had came from somewhere else. Once, I thought I had an original idea, and I was very excited about it. I started teaching people only to discover that Bonhoeffer had written about it 100 years before. And I'm not even sure he had the original idea. It might have come from somebody 1,000 years before. So if we understand where it's all about learning to express ideas, and it's okay to use other people's ideas. Franklin understood this instinctively, but we've kind of lost it with our kind of modernism and emphasis on creativity. All right, continuing on. Then I compared my Spectator with the original, discovered some of my faults and corrected them. But I found I wanted a stock of words or a readiness in recollecting and using them, which I thought I should have acquired before that time if I had gone on making verses, since the continual occasion for words of the same import but of different length to suit the measure of different sound for the rhyme would have laid me under a constant necessity of searching for variety, and also have tended to fix that variety in my mind and make me master of it. Now, I think he wrote this before we had identified the problem of the run-on sentence, because it's a little bit thick. But if you read it a couple times, you get the point. What he's actually saying is, when I tried to re-express these ideas, I discovered I didn't have the vocabulary and the variety of language to do justice to the idea. I think what he's actually saying is, I sure could use a thesaurus of the English language, which I do not think had been developed at that time. What he would think about dictionary.com on your iPhone, I have no idea. But we certainly do have resources that we can share with our students and use ourselves. I think Franklin very much have approved the way we put the word lists on the wall in the teaching environment and give children resources so that they can peruse and look for the best possible words to say what they're trying to say. Okay, now this is kind of interesting. Reading on. Therefore, I took some of the tales and turned them into verse, and after a time, when I had pretty well forgotten the prose, turned them back again. I also sometimes jumbled my collections of hints into confusion, and after some weeks endeavored to reduce them into the best order before I began to form the full sentences and complete the paper. Now that is weird. He had his notes. He intentionally mixed them up. Why would anyone do that? It is terribly impractical. The next sentence answers it. This was to teach me method in the arrangement of thoughts. Isn't that a great phrase? What a great goal for us as teachers, that our students should acquire better method in the arrangement of thoughts. In a way, he was kind of training himself on that research process, right? Where you get a bunch of facts from here and a bunch from here and a bunch from there, and now you've got to put them into a logical order. And so he was kind of mixing it all up and then practicing putting them into a logical order. And again, by using the imitation, comparing his organization with the original organization. You know, a sharp kindergarten teacher could make use of this idea. Long before children could write sentences on paper, you could actually take a little article or story, maybe a little narrative story, put it on sentence strips, read it to the kids a couple times, mix up the sentence strips, and then say, okay, what should go first, what should go next, what should go next, what should go next, why? Do some good thinking, even before you can do writing. In fact, we're going to do a lot of things in this course that I'm going to show you how we do them on paper, because it's a writing program. But if you have young children or teach young children, you can also do a lot of these things verbally with young children before you're able to actually commit them to paper. So keep that in mind. Okay, now from here on, it gets very important. By comparing my work afterwards with the original, I discovered many faults and amended them. But I sometimes had the pleasure of fancying that in certain particulars of small import, I had been lucky enough to improve the method or the language, and this encouraged me to think I might possibly in time come to be a tolerable English writer, of which I was extremely ambitious. Now, that's the most important thing. You know, highlight that, put a big star next to it. The key idea is motivation, right? Read it again. I sometimes had the pleasure of fancying that in certain particulars of small import, I have been lucky enough to improve the method or the language, and this encouraged me. I find this to be consistently true with children that I teach. You know, I do travel around, do classes, and sometimes I will see kids that clearly don't want to be there, right? They come in the door, raccoon eyes, you know, they've been crying in the car. This idea of a 2-hour writing class is as close to real purgatory as they've got. You know, mom's behind them, you're going in there, whether you like it or not, they sit down. And those same kids, 2 hours later, will walk out and say, that was fun. Is he coming back? Can I do that again? Why? Why? Because they experienced this certain particulars of small import. They might have walked out of the room with a version of the Hare and the Tortoise that was almost identical to the one I gave them, except for that cool ly word they put in there. Or they changed the judge from the owl to the cheetah, so no one would get caught cheating. And they can take something and play with it a little bit, and the satisfaction is genuine. I see this to be 100% consistently true. And the reason it's true is because this reflects reality. See, reality is that very few of us are going to gain our satisfaction out of life by becoming a great creative genius. Very few of us will go to our deathbed being a C.S. Lewis or a Florence Nightingale or a Nikola Tesla. Most of us will end our life having gained the satisfaction by making our little corner of the world better in some small way. And that's the truth. So it's a bit disingenuous when you say to a young child, right? Make it up, create something, be unique, be original, do something that nobody's done before. You see? But when you say, here, play with this, see if you can have fun with it, make it a little better maybe. That reflects reality. And of course, the beautiful irony is that Benjamin Franklin himself did become a great creative genius and a great writer and author. But where did he begin? With the discipline of imitation. Do you see? So I like to point that out because I think it sets the tone for what we're going to do now. We're going to take a little break, and then we'll dive into Unit 1 and the keyword outlines from a source text idea, and hopefully keep that in mind as we then navigate through Unit 1, 2, and then on to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. We have a lot to do. Okay, let us turn to Unit 1, and you will see you have a little mini poster there on the first page, page 9. And just like to tell you a little bit about how this book is set up. It is divided into the 9 units. The stylistic techniques, which we'll talk about in a little bit, are in the back, all in one place, and then there are a few appendices. The way this book has been organized is for your benefit later. So what we're going to end up doing is kind of turning back and forth, and I'm going to say turn to this page, and I'll go back to this page, because there's things I want to show you as we go through it and have a hands-on approach. But we want it to be easy for you to use later for review. So each section has goals, recommended materials, teaching procedure, adjusting for grade levels, and then answers to commonly asked questions. And that's always in the front of each unit. Then there will be a demonstration that we will do together, and then there is a practicum session for you to do on your own. And each unit is set up that way. We also have put on the side some of these posters and charts and reminder signs that will be useful for you to have in your teaching environment. We are the Blended Sound Site people by origin, and Mrs. Ingham was a great pioneer of multi-sensory instruction. In other words, if you tell children something, you want also to show it to them. If you show them something, you also want to verbally reinforce that, or through song or poem. And anytime you can get a kinesthetic activity involved, even the better. So we strongly recommend that in your teaching environment, whether it's kind of an area that you use at home for homeschool or a co-op class or people who have their own classrooms, put on the walls things like the poster that goes with the unit, the word lists that I'm going to show you, the little reminder signs. The idea is saturate the environment with what you want the children to internalize. So, as I said earlier, when we had this 11-day teacher training course in Canada, This was in the old days. I mean, this is before you could own a laser printer yourself, right? And the teachers would come up with stacks of construction paper and poster boards and felt markers and yardsticks and Mac tack and, glue. And the teachers would make all the posters for their environment. And that was kind of Mrs. Ingham's old school. She was teaching back in the 30s and 40s. Now people prefer to just be able to buy something or just print it out. It's a little easier. But there's something quite charming about a handmade poster. There really is. It's almost as though you put a bit of your soul into that. So as we go through, please try to imagine these little mini posters on your wall, these word lists on your walls, these reminder signs on your walls for the benefit of the children in your environment. Now, Unit 1 is basically this idea of having a short source text, and you take keywords from each sentence. If you look at the little sample on page 9, the fox and the grapes, this is very, very short. Hungry fox saw a bunch of ripe grapes. They dangled high up on a vine. He jumped and jumped but could not reach them. He said, "I'll bet those grapes are sour anyway." So you would want to be sure that the source texts you use, especially when you start, are at or preferably below the reading level of the students. You want it to be easy for them to understand, easy for them to read and make a decision. The keyword outline then, you would look at that first sentence. A hungry fox saw a bunch of ripe grapes, and choose the key words: hungry, saw, and ripe. Now, you probably don't need fox and grapes because that was in the title, so those are like freebies, but hopefully that would remind you. Dangled, high, vine. Jumped, and then you see a little symbol, the not symbol. He could not reach them, right? And said they're sour anyway. So the student will read the sentence, choose the key words, transfer them into the outline. We're going to do this together, so don't worry. Then, the next step, of course, would be to kind of remove from your view the original, look at the keywords, and remember why you chose them. Hungry, saw, ripe. Why did I write that? Oh, yeah, I remember. The fox who was hungry saw some ripe grapes, right? And you make a sentence verbally out of those key words. Now, this verbal telling it back is extremely important. You must not skip this step. It's extremely important for several reasons. Number one, it kind of tests the outline. If you can't verbally make a sentence out of your keywords, then it's going to be real hard to write one, isn't it? So, and if you look and you say, whoa, dangled, I don't remember why I wrote that, well, you could go and read the original again, refresh yourself. Oh, okay, now I remember, and then continue on telling it. So when you tell it verbally, it tests the outline. It's very important that you don't make the child feel like you're testing them, right? This is not a test of the child. It's the child learning to test the outline. And so that's the first thing. Another thing is that if you have noticed, children sometimes skip words when they write. Have you ever noticed that? It's the sign of a fast brain, I suppose. You're just kind of skipping things. So if you kind of say to yourself what you want to say, you don't tend to skip words when you talk, right? You tend to put all those words in there. And so if children say it once through, they're likely to hear all the words so that then if they go to write it out, they will have at least heard themselves think. That is, by the way, one reason why young children constantly talk to themselves. Have you ever noticed this? I remember with my son at a certain age, he'd be in his Lego world and be, no, you get over there, no, get him, no, jump, no! And my daughter, you be good, you be still, you stay here, you sit on the couch, I'll be back, goodbye. The idea is that children learn to hear what they're thinking by talking. This is why when you put children in an environment where young children, where you say, sit down, be quiet, and only speak when you have permission, it's a little bit like saying, shut off your brain here. Right? I ran a preschool for a couple years, and I would ask, I had this little group of 12 children ages 3.5 to 5.5. I would ask them a question and let them all answer me at the same time. You would have thought I'm running a zoo or something. But I knew it was more important for them to talk than for anyone to hear what they were saying. So that talking. Now, when you get to be about my age, you start talking to yourself again so you can hear what you're thinking. But that's because you're on the other side of the neurological spectrum. Although my good friend Andrew Kern says, it's if you don't talk to yourself, that's when you're crazy. And of course, now you can get away with it. Just stick a little Bluetooth thing in your ear. You don't even have to have it connected to your phone, and you just talk to yourself all day and nobody think a thing of it. So, all right, so we want to talk it back. Now, probably the best way to do this is just to jump in and try one together. So turn to page 13, if you will. And here we have a little article on book lice. I'll just read it through once, and then you can see that we're going to actually create a keyword outline ourselves. So, book lice are tiny insects that eat mold and mildew in old books and on papers and maps. They also crawl around on floors, bookshelves, windowsills, and walls, looking for moist places where mold abounds. A book louse is usually less than 2 millimeters long. But don't just look for book lice, listen for them too. To attract a mate, the female of one species makes an audible clicking when it strikes its abdomen against paper or wood. So if you should ever hear faint creaking or light tapping noises on the library shelves, you won't be imagining things. The place is just alive with book lice. Isn't that lovely? And it's true. I was reading in Teacher magazine a while ago about a school in upstate New York that had got such an infestation of book lice in their library, and they couldn't fumigate because students were there. They had to microwave individually all 10,000 volumes in their library to kill the book lice, so be careful there. All right, we're going to go ahead and make an outline. Now, I would recommend, in general, that children use a separate sheet of paper. We've put the place for the outline in your workbook just for your convenience. But ideally, you'd like to have the source text on one piece of paper and then just a blank piece of paper for the outline. So we'll go ahead and do this together. And reading the first sentence, book lice are tiny insects that eat mold and mildew in old books and on papers and maps. All right, what key words would help you remember that basic idea? Just shout out. What do you like?
Mold.
Insects, okay. Now, what I would recommend is that you actually, especially with young children or children who struggle a bit with the reading, writing stuff, let them underline the keywords as they choose them. So, insects, we've got one. What else do you like?
Eat.
Eat, okay. And you get a maximum of 3, so you can have one more. Books or mold, mildew, wouldn't really matter. Let's go with the mold. And so we choose the 3, and then we'll transfer them into the keyword outline. So, insects, eat, and mold. All right, so that should help us remember the basic idea. We recommend that children put a comma, or all students put a comma in between the keywords. So we separate the keywords with the commas and maintain that discipline through all of the units and all of the outlines. They also crawl around on floors, bookshelves, windowsills, and walls looking for moist places where mold abounds. Keywords?
Crawl. Crawl.
Crawl? You know, I've noticed there's almost personality types when it comes to keyword outlines. There are verb people. I am a verb person. Verb people are usually the first to speak in a group. We're very verbal, and we're probably hyperactive children. I just will almost always choose verbs, and I lock me into verbs very easily. But not everybody is. There are noun people. My mother, I'm quite sure, was a noun person, kind of a detail-oriented Virgo type, just every little detail thing in its spot. Noun people get frustrated by sentences like this because they think, oh no, there's floors, bookshelves, windowsills, and walls, and places, and how am I going to remember all that? So noun people just have to relax a little bit. Then there's adjective types. They're usually the quiet, artistic, intuitive. They sit in the back, they never speak, but they just think, oh, if I could just pick that adjective, I'd see it all in my brain. Moist, that would do it for me, moist. Now, the reason I point this out is because you may be different than your students, than your children. You might be a person who would like certain words and they might choose certain others. So I would say, be flexible. Let them experiment with it and try it out. I would, of course, discourage anyone from becoming a preposition or article type because that doesn't work quite as well. And I actually have seen children who will write in, and is as their 3 key words because those are the shortest words in the sentence, taking the least amount of effort to write. But then they test it out and discover not perhaps as helpful. So, okay, so verb people now, calm down, and let's pick a few others. What do you like?
Moist.
Moist, okay, an adjective person who talk, that's great. You get one more. Shelves? All right, we'll go with bookshelves. Okay, so we'll transfer them in. Crawl, bookshelves, and moist. Now, you'll notice that we're limiting to 3, even though this is kind of a longer sentence. And I will, with high school students, sometimes start with 4, just because the source texts are longer and a little more complicated. And it doesn't really matter whether you start with 3 or 4. What matters is that you set a limit and hold to it strictly. Because what will happen if you don't hold to it strictly? Well, someone will say, oh, this is a long sentence, couldn't I please use 5? Someone will say, well, if he can have 5, I'm sure I could have 6. Someone else will say, well, 6, 7, what's the difference? Pretty soon, what would be happening? Yeah, they'd start writing the whole sentence or big chunks of it. So the strict limiting to the 3, it seems a little harsh sometimes, but it's a good discipline. Because one of the things that we're discovering is that the skill of limiting carries on past just the sentences. You get to Unit 4, not only that, you got too many facts. In fact, that's the big problem with the world today, is there's just too much information. Have you ever noticed that? Think how much easier it would have been to be a student 1,000 years ago. There was a lot less history. Just a fraction of the science. Not nearly as much literature. Would have been so much easier. Of course, there are certain benefits of modern dentistry. All right. So my point there was that the skill of limiting is an important one when we are constantly overloaded with information. So we just start right here. All right, next sentence. A book louse is usually less than 2 millimeters long. Now, you math people, right? You're thinking, wait a minute. Less than is a symbol. 2 is a number, and millimeters is an abbreviation. Why would we need any more than that? And you're right, math people. That is sufficient. And the good news is that symbols, numbers, and abbreviations are free. So you can have 3 words plus symbols, numbers, and abbreviations. You do have to be a little careful, though. I had a little girl in a class once, and she had got her keyword outline going, and she did this. And I said, what is that? And she said, it's a symbol. You said we could use symbols. You know how old she was, right? I said, it's a symbol for what? She said, it's the swarms of dance flies swirling and twirling in the damp areas in the forests of North America. I thought, well, I'm glad you have such a great memory, but are you going to remember that tomorrow when you look at it? So my rule on symbols is that you have to be able to write the symbol faster than you could write the word. Otherwise, it's not a symbol. It's an elaborate little picture. And the other one would be that you have to be able to recognize it next time you see it and remember what you're doing. Had a little guy once got in trouble with some abbreviations. He had put on his keyword outline MATOA and then a couple keywords. And he raised his hand. I came over. He kind of sheepishly said, "I don't remember why I wrote that." I said, "Well, I have no idea." So I brought the original paper and we read it. He had abbreviated "most amazing thing of all." So the idea then is abbreviations, symbols, commonly recognized and useful. But that gives a little bit of flexibility. And some kids do very well with the use of symbols. All right, let's move on. But don't just look for book lice, listen for them too. Now, let's say you are teaching and one of your students is just kind of not getting it. They're not choosing keywords. It almost seems like they're picking at random and you're a little bit frustrated because you don't think it's going to work. You can help them. And one way you could do that is say, let's read it again, shall we? But don't just look for book lice. Listen for them too. Then your student will likely choose. Look, listen, and two. And then you can say, "Good choices. That's going to work. I think you're getting the hang of it." Right? And that's a perfectly valid method of teaching. It's called modeling. Right? So you're helping them see what might work better. Okay, to attract a mate, the female of one species makes an audible clicking when it strikes its abdomen against paper or wood. Now, you symbol people are going crazy here. You're thinking, aha. The female attracts the mate. Now, if you know those symbols, you could use them. If you don't, you wouldn't. We actually have given little handouts to kids so that they can kind of build a repertoire of symbols. But they're free, so what else do you like here? Female attracts a mate. Clicking. Abdomen. Paper, okay. So, female attracts a mate. Clicking. Sound. Abdomen. Paper. All right. So, if you should ever hear faint creaking or light tapping noises on the library shelves, you won't be imagining things. What do you like? Okay, hear, creaking, not imagining. Okay, and we'll use the not symbol. So, hear, creaking, imagining. Not imagining. Place is just alive with book lice. And there's no rule that says you have to have 3. If you just feel that 1 or 2 will do you to convey that idea, to transfer that idea, you can just put 1 or 2. So there's no rule that says you have to have them. All right, so that's kind of what a keyword outline looks like. We have the source text I chose because I believed it to be at or below your reading level. And what would be the next step in the process?
Tell it back.
Tell it back verbally. Now, let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to pick on our front row because you're all very nice and happy and smiling. And there's microphones near you. So, Cora, would you be willing to start us out here by telling back the idea that kind of would go with that first sentence? Just make it into a sentence.
So book lice are insects that eat mold.
There you go. Book lice are insects that eat mold. Now, was hers exactly like the original? No. Do I care? No. Did she say it in a complete sentence? Yes. Do I care? Yes. We want to have a complete sentence. And if I ever meet a student, and it's rare, I will say, if I meet a student who can't do that, who can't make a sentence out of the words, I'll just go so far as to dictate a sentence, have them repeat back. Dictate, repeat back, dictate, repeat back, and just model it real tightly. But I would say almost all native speakers of English will naturally speak incomplete sentences and get the hang of this almost instantly. It's not a tough one. Aaron, you've had time to study up now and do something with crawl on bookshelves and moist.
They crawl on bookshelves and other moist places.
Okay. They crawl on bookshelves and in other moist places. That would kind of imply that bookshelves are moist.
Or can I revise it?
Sure, you can revise it.
They crawl on bookshelves looking for moist places.
They crawl on bookshelves looking for moist places, because that's where all the mold is, I guess, right? All right, Alyssa, you get the very short one here.
They are usually or mainly less than 2 millimeters.
They are usually less than 2 millimeters. Good, which is pretty small, I guess, right? Joanne, how about that one?
You can look for book lice, but you can listen for them too.
You can look for book lice, but you can listen for them too. Thelma.
The book lice attract females by clicking their abdomen along the paper.
All right, the book lice attract the females. Let's just double check our fact on that one. To attract a mate, the female. Yeah, okay, you want to restate that?
All right. The book lice attract females.
No,
the female book lice. All right, forget this.
Yeah.
The females attract a mate by clicking their abdomen along the paper.
There you go, perfect. And is that fine if we're a little confused? Go back, read it again. Yes, this is not a test of anybody. It's not a test of your memory. We're just, and you can, if you discover that you need to, change something on the keyword outline. You know, if it's not working, change it. Although, you have to be a little bit careful. I had this boy in a class once, and I looked at his paper, and he had written 3 keywords, crossed them all out, and put 3 more keywords. And at first I thought, oh, he's being very careful about checking if his keywords are the best ones. But then I realized he could still read the crossed out ones. He had written 6 words and then crossed out 3, stomping all over my system. All right, where are we on? Catherine?
So you can hear them creaking and making tapping noises and you're not imagining it.
So you can hear them creaking and making tapping noises and you're not imagining it. Great, all right, and Libby, finish this up there.
The library is alive with book lice.
The library is alive with book lice. Okay, see how that works? So we talk it through, double check if we need to, make adjustments if necessary. And with a class of younger children, you could actually do that again. I mean, we could pick on the second row or we could ask for volunteers and try to get everybody involved. So talking it through is going to help to improve the comprehension as well, isn't it? In fact, I have had so many people in special education, parents with kids who have learning disability of some sort, reading specialists have come to me and said, wow, this keyword outline idea is the most effective thing we've ever done just to improve basic comprehension. At first I thought, oh, isn't that nice? And then I started to wonder, why is that true? And I noticed something about some children. Have you ever noticed that some kids can just watch the words go by and think they read it? Right? And you say, did you read it? Yeah. What did it say? I don't know. Well, did you read it? Yeah. So what did it say? I don't know. Well, did you really read it? Yes, I did. You can go on like that forever. But when you have to read a sentence, stop and ask yourself a question. What are the key words in this sentence? That's an entirely different activity. It's called thinking, right? So just doing this can have a very beneficial effect on the reading comprehension. And then, of course, it becomes content that you might want to learn about anyway. One of the things that Dr. Webster would stress is all through all through the 9 units of the syllabus. This is a source-based approach to teaching writing. So you have to come up with source texts and source stories and source references and pictures. We're giving kids the stuff they're going to be writing and talking, thinking, reading, thinking, and writing about. So it lends itself perfectly to integration with your content areas. So things from history, things from science, things from literature, things from geography, things from religion. Anything that you are teaching, you also want them to be reading and talking and writing about, you see, because you learn it better. In fact, I bet every one of us has had that experience of having written something out, and that's when you really know it. Or when you tell it to someone, that's when it kind of locks in your brain. So as we go through the units, start thinking, aha, what source materials could I use that would be connected with what we're studying in some other content area? And we've really, over the past couple decades, developed materials that are like history-based writing lessons or theme-based writing lessons to help you do that with your students. But you're probably not going to forget about book lice here. That's probably the case. The other thing that is fantastic about the keyword outline is it is a way to train children to do public speaking. Now there are a few notes on page 12 and then many more extensive notes in the appendix you can look at later on public speaking. Dr. Webster never wanted this to be called a writing program. He wanted it to be called a written and oral communication program because the speaking part is very, very critical. And I am a firm believer that the sooner you train children to stand up in front of their peers and speak formally, the easier it will be for their entire life, right? Some of you know I was a violin teacher for the first half of my adult life, and I guarantee you it is easier to get a 7-year-old to stand up and play their first violin recital than to get a 17-year-old to stand up and play their first violin recital. And a lot of adults are afraid of public speaking. In fact, it's listed as one of the top fears that people have. So I would strongly encourage you, whether you're in the homeschool, the co-op, or the 5-day-a-week school, make regular public speaking a part of your language arts curriculum. Now, one of the ways that you can use the keyword outline is to train the children to speak to people rather than to paper. Do you remember the old oral report? It's just so awful. My report is on Japan. It is a country in Asia. And here's this, when is this going to be over? Plus, it took the entire semester to get all 28 kids through these oral reports, so everybody got a chance once. I have worked with kids in speech and debate myself, and I will tell you, it's one of the hardest things is to get them to look at the paper but speak to the people. So keyword outlines are perfect here because you've got your hints, and you can actually train the students to do it a certain way. So here's a kind of a summary here of stage 1. First of all, give them a lectern or a music stand or something, and they can put their hands on it and hold their hands in one place. Because children, especially young ones, they won't know what to do with their hands, and so they become a horrible distraction, you know. So hold the lectern. Then, on a nice large card, you copy the keyword outline so it can be seen from arm's length there. And then you make some rules. You say the rules of public speaking are, you can look at your notes and think what you're going to say, but then you have to look up at the people and say what you were thinking. You may not speak while your eyes are on the paper. Oh, this is so good. The training that this engenders to look and think and then speak what you thought. You can watch kids do this and almost see them exerting their willpower over their brain cells, just forcing those neurons to make connections. Of course, the first time you try it, it may look a little bit like this. Book lice are tiny insects that eat mold. They crawl around on the floors and bookshelves looking for moist places where mold grows. They are very small, usually less than 2 millimeters. See? So you look, think, look up, and speak. And this is such great training, such fantastic training. So if you have a classroom, you have the ideal situation because you've got a captive audience. And you can do this. You know, in fact, Webster would always say, do public speaking every day in the classroom. Just 2 or 3 kids, right? And it's only going to take a few minutes to do each one. So you squeeze, 10, 15 minutes out of your day, and you give everyone a chance to tell a little speech from a keyword outline on some source text that you used. And if you had, say, 20 to 30 children in your class, and you did 2 or 3 children each day, how often would everybody get a chance? Every 2 weeks, right? And how many school weeks in the year? Yeah, 30 good ones, maybe. So everybody would get 15 chances to stand up in front of their peers and give a little speech from a keyword outline. Wouldn't that be an invaluable gift to develop that aptitude in young children? Now, in the homeschool, you have to work a little harder because you don't have that built-in audience, and it's kind of hard to get formal in front of mom and the baby, So I recommend that if you have a couple families and you could get together every other week and just have a public speaking party, and the kids can all have a couple outlines, speak it to each other, and then you can have a picnic and play Frisbee or whatever. Make it fun. But try and find those opportunities, even if you have to create them yourself, for the children to practice this, because it's very, very powerful. And then if you like, later you can read some of Webster's additional ideas for expanding public speaking by the choreographing of gestures, movements, building into like a radio program, and all sorts of ideas there. As I said, I'm a very big fan of developing leadership skills in children. And really, it's the people who can stand up and speak articulately and write well that rise up in leadership positions, right? The best engineer remains an engineer because that's what he's good at. But the engineer who can speak and write engineering ideas will naturally become a leader. So, all right. Now, if you flip over to page 14 and 15, you will see a few samples. One of the things we've tried to do in this book is to put student samples from a wide range of levels so that you can see what this looks like, with a primary, grade 2 student, and you can see how it looks like even with a high school student. You'll also notice that you're not limited to one paragraph selections. The In a Nutshell and the Sharpshooter were 3 paragraph selections. And so here we see then there's 3 Roman numerals. Now, a few of you might have been a bit allergic to my outline format. Was anyone kind of thinking, wait a minute, you are not allowed to have a Roman numeral 1 unless you have a Roman numeral 2. You knew that, right? And furthermore, where is the big A? It's missing. Now, I'll be honest, I have never met a student who has a problem with this. Only adults who've been steeped in the true dogma of outlining. So I'll just explain why we do it this way. This is how I learned it from the Canadians years ago, and it's worked very well. We correspond a Roman numeral with a paragraph. So if you only have one paragraph, you only have one Roman numeral. Now, in units 1, 2, and 3, in the beginning here, the Roman numeral has no hierarchical value other than first thing coming at you, right? So we just put the first sentence or the first idea on that line, and we're not worried about anything. Later, in Unit 4, we will assign the Roman numeral the job of holding the topic sentence, at which point you outline purists will breathe a sigh of relief. But it works quite well. Children get used to the format, used to the idea that paragraph equals Roman numeral, and we just carry that on and add a bit more meaning to that as we go. We don't use the A, the big A, for two reasons. Number one, with young children, the A can kind of get smushed next to the word next to it, and then you have a different looking word. So the numeral is actually more discrete. 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. And we really don't need more than one layer because we want to limit the size of a paragraph. I'm sure you've seen these outlines. We have the Roman numeral, then you have the big A, and then you have the little 1, 2, and then you have the little a, and then you have the little... You can go on forever and never get to the big B, right? So to limit the size of the paragraph, we simply have the Roman numeral, a specific number of details, and we're done. Unit 4, we'll add the topic sentence, and then in later units, we'll talk a little bit more about how to structure those details in the paragraph. But for now, we're just trying to get the kids used to moving ideas with keywords and the outline format. It's interesting, too, because you'll meet students, especially if you didn't raise them up from young ones. They come to you, in middle school or something, and they'll say, I don't need to do outlines. I know what I'm going to write. Or they'll say, do I have to do an outline? Because it seems like extra work. In fact, I remember this one little girl I met. It was a convention. She was there before we had started the convention, and I'm setting up my little table, and this was in Colorado, I remember. She comes over, and she says, I know you. You're that writing guy on that video. I said, yep, that's probably me. She goes, I hate that. I said, that's great. What do you hate the most? And she goes, making those outlines. I said, well, do they help you write better? She said, of course. It's like brushing your teeth. You don't necessarily feel like doing it, but it does make a better product. The great thing about Unit 1 is that's all it is. You can't skip the step because that is the step, right? So even with older students, I will start with a Unit 1 and show them the process of working with this keyword outline here. And you can see, with this standard time source text, that's much longer, much more sophisticated, and yet the process is the same whatever grade you're in. So we've tried to put, as I said, samples in for all levels so that all teachers and parents of kids of all ages will see there's application here. Okay, that is basically Unit 1. Let's talk about Unit 2 briefly, and then we'll take a little break, and then we'll come back for style technique. Okay, that'll work better. Are you all fine? Okay. If you're really having a hard time sitting, just make a really pained face or something, and I'll say, oh, they need a break. It's really much easier to stand and talk all day than it is to sit and listen. So I appreciate it. Okay, now Unit 2, which begins on page 17, is essentially the same thing as Unit 1, only we're going to go the next step and put it into prose. Put the keywords back into sentences on paper. So that's why Unit 1 and 2 kind of go together. If you watch me teach a student workshop or a demonstration class, unless it's very, very young children, I will immediately roll into the writing part. And I think it's a good thing to note that these two kind of operate concurrently. The keyword outline of Unit 1 is part of the process of Unit 2, but even when you start writing out the keyword outlines into prose, you don't have to stop making keyword outlines. In fact, what I would recommend is that you do lots of keyword outline only, and then take some of them and put them into the paragraph form, the prose form. If, for example, I were teaching 5th grade, I would probably try to do 1, 2, maybe even 3 short keyword outlines each day. And I would try to do some that are connected with social studies, some that are connected with something in science, some maybe Aesop fables, right? And so you could do 1 or 2 keyword outlines, even 3, each day, but then just choose 1 or 2 or maybe 3 of them to write out. So you could have lots of outlines, and then you could write some of them into prose. Do you see how that would work? So Unit 2 can really start immediately. As soon as you've got a keyword outline, you can write it out, but you don't have to write out every one of them. And I think that's a good way to go. Then you've also got more ammunition for public speaking and more outlines to work with, and you're going to learn things better because of doing keyword outlines in the subject areas. So just that idea of they're kind of concurrent in that way. You will also notice on page 18, there's a few reminder signs. You, in your teaching environment or your class, you may have a slightly different format, the way you want students to set up the paper. We've tried to be consistent, similar to what MLA will be for them. But you could change these to meet your needs. The 4-point check was Mrs. Ingham's reminder sign for her first graders. And the thing I would like to really talk about is a few of what I would consider very important things for us to keep in mind when we ask children to write on paper. And one of those is that English composition, spelling, and handwriting are very different things as far as the brain is concerned. They're so different that they don't even happen in the same part of the brain. English composition is a language function. It is putting words into sentences that make sense, syntax, and sentences into a logical order, right? It's a language function. Handwriting, for example, has nothing to do with that. What is handwriting in its simplest form? What would you say? Motor skill, or even similar, it's like art, isn't it? You see a pattern, and you try to copy the pattern, and you try to copy the pattern with so much repetition that you can remove the original and do it from memory, and then you try to do that with so much repetition that it becomes automatic, that you don't have to think about it. But for many children, that takes time. That takes time. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't teach handwriting. Obviously, you should teach handwriting. I'm even now becoming more and more a believer that learning cursive is a good thing. Some schools have thrown it out completely. A few states have readopted it. There's new, exciting research about how cursive activates the brain, particularly the artistic areas of the brain that are not activated when printing or typing. But what I would say is this. If what you want is good English composition, don't pester the kids about writing neatly, because if you do that, it'll kind of split their brain, and they'll do neither thing well. Add in spelling, and then it really becomes a challenge. In fact, spelling is possibly the weirdest thing that any English-speaking person ever has to learn. And it is the weirdest language to have to learn. I mean, Spanish pretty much just works. But spelling, what is it? What is it? I have pondered long and hard the nature of the beast, and I finally came up with a definition I'd like to share with you. Spelling is the correct retrieval of sequentially stored, virtually random bits of information. And even if you know all the rules, those in and of themselves are somewhat random. And there is absolutely no logical reason or etymological reason as to why street is spelled E-E and treat is spelled E-A. Right? You just have to learn it. It's random. So I have a talk I would love to give you right now, but I would have to compress 90 minutes into 5, and I won't do that. So you can go to our website and listen to my 90-minute talk on spelling and the brain, where I talk about the nature of spelling, what it is, better and worse ways to learn it, how children learn differently, and the nature of the brain, and how we need frequency, intensity, and duration to store information, and then, of course, the importance of Greek and Latin roots and word roots to expand spelling ability. So I'm all into helping everybody teach spelling and learn spelling. I think it's, unfortunately, the attitude of a lot of kids is, why do I need to know I have a computer that will spell check? Only spell checking on computers can be even more embarrassing than writing it wrong the first way. So I'm not saying don't teach spelling, but what I would say is if what you want is good English composition, don't then expect children to spell everything correctly. And I bet you've had this experience where they write a story, they spell a word wrong, and you think, how could you spell that wrong? That was on your spelling test last week, right? You had that happen. Well, here's what's happening in their brain. They're way over in the language part of their brain. They are putting a sentence together that makes sense, that's logical. They're functioning there. They want to write a word. They might know how to spell it, but to do so, they would have to go out of the language part of the brain, all the way over to the spelling part of the brain, search around until they find that spelling word, pick it up, carry it all the way back over to the writing part of the brain, and by the time they've done that, they have completely forgot what they wanted to do with the word. So they will sacrifice the spelling in favor of the train of thought, which is very reasonable. So I would say best thing to do is, and I'm not into this inventive spelling thing, but best thing to do is just be a human dictionary. Just be there. And if you want to spell a word, just ask me and I'll spell it for you. If you're not able, just say, give it your best guess, we'll fix it up later. And so they can kind of keep going. The best analogy for this that I can come up with is driving. Have any of you ever taught a teenager to drive? I've done this now 5 times. 6 times, I guess. 1 more to go. And it's kind of funny because when they first start driving, they get in the car and they're thinking, okay, there's this wheel and there's these mirrors, there's these pedals, and I can do this and not kill us. And they use every erg of energy to not kill you, for which you are very grateful. But after you've been driving for 10 years, right? You get in the car, you start driving, and you can drink your lattes, and you can surf the radio, and you can check your GPS, and you can talk on the phone, unless you're in California where you have to be looking around for the cops while you're talking on the phone. And you can, read the newspaper at the stoplights. Now, I'm not saying you should do all these things, but it's interesting that you can do all sorts of things while you're driving and not even notice that you are driving. That would be sublimation, automation. It becomes automatic, you don't have to think about it. So what happens with children is gradually handwriting and spelling becomes automatic and they don't have to think about it and it doesn't interfere with their composition. But that can take years, sometimes more years than you would like it to take, especially if kids have challenges in that area. So what I like to do is I like to suggest. Actually, I don't suggest, I just boss people around. But in my classes, I make a very interesting rule, and that is no erasing allowed. And I highly recommend you make this rule. Number 1, it eliminates a horrific waste of time. Erasing is an unbelievable waste of time. Have you ever watched a child write a sentence, decide they don't like it, and erase the whole thing? Right? It takes 3 or 4 times as long to erase a sentence as it does to write one. Another research I just found out about shows that when you turn the pencil upside down, it disconnects something in your brain. So it causes a circuit break of some sort. So it interrupts the flow of an idea. So I just say, no erasing allowed. Just strike through and keep going. If you want to change something, line it out, and in the space above, put what you want. If you're going to do this, you do have to have the children get the habit of double spacing. because if they don't skip lines, then they can't change things very easily, and that's frustrating to them. Another reason that no erasing is so good is it fights the type of perfectionism that is actually detrimental to good writing, right? Good writing means you have to be willing to change things. You have to be willing to write it and rewrite it and change it and maybe change it again. And there's a type of perfectionism that kind of operates like this. I am going to do it perfect the first time, so I don't have to change anything and I won't have to copy it over. Now, if I get a student like that in my class, I just come over with my pen and I change stuff and make a big mess and give it back to her and say, there's no hope. You're going to have to rewrite it, so let go. You can usually spot these kids because they'll, erase 2 words so they can squeeze in the 3 that are supposed to be there. So, I actually recommend, honestly, this may shock some of you, that you encourage children, even young ones, to use pen rather than pencil. Now, at first, you think, oh, that could be awful. But there are some very good reasons for it. Number 1, you cannot erase a pen. Therefore, the temptation is gone, right? Number 2, pencils can be tactilely, emotionally, neurologically disturbing. And I can prove this to you. Have you ever watched children who have to sharpen their pencil every 5 minutes? They want to sharpen their pencil. Now, you think it's because they want to get up and move around a little bit. The truth is, this pencil is unnerving to them because it's constantly changing. Did you know that? When you start writing with a pencil, it's one level of friction. It's one tactile kinesthetic experience. 2 minutes later, it's duller. So it's a different experience. 2 minutes later, it's duller. And 2 minutes after that, it's so different that the child wants one thing above all else. That would be consistency, right? They want that pencil to stay the same. That's why they go to sharpen it all the time. Give them a pen, they'll sit there for an hour. Pens don't change. A third reason, or I guess this would be the second reason that pens are better than pencils for some kids, not all, but many children have a problem with tired hand disease. Do any of you have kids who claim tired hand disease? That is usually because they're pushing hard and holding the pencil too tight. Now here's why pencils are promoting tired hand disease. When you write with a pencil, it's not dark, right? So to make it darker, you have to push harder. And what children like is a nice, clear, dark line, especially those kids who are, I don't know, you might call them mildly dyslexic. I would just call them not quite cooked yet. They're just visually immature. What they want to see is a darker line because it's easier to see, and so they will push harder, which not only causes tired hand disease, it causes them to break the tip of the darn pencil, and they got to go sharpen it again. So if you're completely married to the ideas of pencils, then what you probably would want is thick, soft, lead, mechanical pencil, so that it'll be consistent and easier to make a darker line. But then you have to deal with all the clicking and the lead falling all over the place, because I'm just saying scrap the pencil idea and use a pen. That thing we learned in school, maybe you're old enough. Some of you are old enough. Some of you are not. They used to tell us, rough draft in pencil, final in pen. Remember that? It should be exactly the opposite. Rough draft in pen, so you don't waste any time erasing, and final in pencil, so that if you make a transcription error, then you could erase it and have a nice finished up final version. Now these days, most kids are pushing to type things earlier and younger and sooner and sooner. And so that brings up a couple questions. Should children even bother to learn to write on paper? That's a question some people have asked. The drive in education is to bring technology into the classroom younger and younger. And I would say, with certain exceptions, such as profoundly dysgraphic kids or even like a cerebral palsy can't hold a pencil. You've got an extreme case, that would be an exception. But for the most part, I do think you should start children writing on paper and keep them writing on paper probably for as long as you can. At least their first draft, the rough draft. Now, you'll start to lose the battle probably when they're about 13, 14. They're just going to say, why? Why can't I type it? But if you start too young and they never develop the ability to write on paper, then that skill will have never developed and they will be without it for their whole life. Whereas if you keep it going at least till, 13 or 14, then they may want to type everything the way you or I probably do, but they'll still have that skill. And there's a few reasons. One is the research shows that writing on paper actually affects the brain differently, and you use more of your brain when you're writing on paper. One interesting research I came up showed that students who take notes in college classes on paper remember more than students who type their notes into a laptop. And there were two theories as to why this was true. One is that they're using more of their brain, they're listening, they're moving it through their brain in a more intimate, meaningful way. The other theory I found very interesting, it fits in with our whole idea of keyword outlining and key ideas, is that students who write on paper will write less than students who type, and therefore they will write only the more important things because they have to limit more carefully. Isn't that interesting? The other thing I have heard is that there are increasing numbers of professors who have banned laptops in class and pads and phones because, it's very depressing to teach a whole room full of people playing solitaire. No, come in here, let's talk, listen to me, write stuff down. There's something we haven't quite lost. Now, who knows, a decade from now, nobody may write everything. We may just talk to our devices and that's what we do. But it's not gone quite yet. There's a saying, and I'm not sure who to attribute this to. I'm not even sure I agree with it, but I like the saying. And it goes like this. Hemingway wrote better than Grisham for lack of a computer. Twain wrote better than Hemingway for lack of a typewriter. Homer wrote better than Twain for lack of paper. Something about that idea that technology will kind of atrophy the skill which it replaces. And I was very interested to discover that C.S. Lewis, everything he wrote, on paper with a fountain pen. Something artistic and poetic. Whereas Hemingway hauled a typewriter on a camel out to the wilds, So, here's my suggestion for kind of the balance there. With younger children, writing on paper, then you edit for them, and then they recopy in pencil so that they can make a nice, as perfected as possible second version. Once they're starting to type, then first draft on paper, edit, then they type the second, and then if you want to, you can make a few more corrections and edits, right? And you can spit out a third version and get a very perfected final version, or a fourth even, without a lot of effort. Whereas to rehandwrite something a third time, it's just not worth it. You wouldn't do it, right? And then when kids get to the point where they're going to be typing their paper without writing on paper first, I strongly recommend that you let them type it and then print out a paper copy, edit it on the paper, hand it back to them, and then they put in the changes and print out the final version. So I think that's the balance. There's a few notes on page 21 regarding this idea. And you can, kind of develop your own philosophy. But that's kind of where I'm at right now with it all, technology and all that. If you want to, you can just peek onto page 24 and 25, where you actually see the summaries written from the keyword outlines that were in the Unit 1 there. So you see, in Unit 1, we showed you the source text and the student outline. Here we show you the student outline and the written out by the student composition. So you can peruse those at your leisure. We are going to take a little break, and then we will come back and discuss the stylistic techniques, get into the dress-ups, and then we will do a practice session with the dress-ups and our book lice outline. So this should all come together for you very nicely. So take a little break, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so that's about most of what I would have to present to you for Units 1 and 2. We are going to do the demonstration and the practicum after the style, but does anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about so far? Yes, Maureen.
Where do we find the right kind of source text to do this?
Oh, excellent question. A couple of considerations. One is you want the source material to be at, or as I said, at or preferably below the reading level of the student. So you would, look in books that would be kind of easy for them. I like Aesop fables because they are generally readily available. They come in all different flavors. They come in books that are illustrated, which children like. Or you can go to aesopfables.com and get all 180 some of them, print them out in a nice large font. I also do find that children enjoy animals, especially interesting animals, unusual animals. Boys tend to, some girls, but boys tend to like things that are dangerous or disgusting or, ugly, things that are powerful. So I've got a few sources that I have collected up that way. We have tried to put together sets of source texts that are available for you. So if you are busy or can't find what you want, we've got our source text ebook, we've got theme-based writing lessons and all that. But I really do like it when people can say, aha, what we're wanting to learn is this, and oh, here's a little article that relates to that you can use. The great thing about being in a classroom is that you get to teach different children each year, so you can reuse your favorite sources. In the homeschool or the hybrid school, you kind of teach the same kids for a longer time. You don't quite have as much opportunity to reuse things. There are actually several good online encyclopedias. I subscribe to Britannica.com, and it has a children's version of articles. So if I want to get information on a specific thing that we're going to read about or talk about, I can go there and get one that's written more to elementary level. And then you can also click through to links, and there's a lot available. One good thing about having an electronic source is that you can change the font size. And if you've got young children or children who have visual issues, mildly dyslexic kids, the larger font's going to be easier for them to work with. Is that good enough?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Elisa?
My student has a hard time writing if we're doing this together, writing quickly enough to get the thoughts down.
Yes.
And then translating it. Do you have suggestions on how to help those students?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. How old is this child?
She's 8.
8. Yeah. Well, a couple of things. Number one, having a keyword outline will help tremendously because you no longer have to think about what's the next thing I'm going to say. You just have to think about how do I put those words into a sentence. So just that change is going to help. But in terms of working with children who just really are slow and labored at just putting a sentence on paper, what I would recommend is that you could start by letting them, dictate to you, and you write down what they say. But I wouldn't stay there too long. And the in-between zone would be to take turns. So she could look at the keyword outline, dictate the first sentence to you, you write it down, then you dictate the next sentence to her, and she writes that down, and then you just, trade the pen back and forth, and that gives her both the chance to create a sentence and the opportunity to write down what she hears. And so then at a certain point, she'll say, okay, Mom, I'm okay. You don't have to do that anymore. And build up the stamina that way. Do any of you have children for whom just the putting of words on paper is painful, difficult, and seems overwhelming? I would recommend that you kind of do something that is not popularly done. It is rare to see this happen in schools, but just straight copy work. Just let the children copy from some source, a story, a fable, the Bible. My son copied the Usborne book of Knights and Medieval Weaponry, right? And just let them copy maybe 15, 20 minutes a day. And this is great. You don't have to think about anything. You don't have to think about putting keywords into sentences. You don't have to think about, should this be capital or not? You just look, right? And you just copy. Now, a lot of people think that that's kind of a boring, evil, awful thing that, was condemned way back when rote learning and drill were given a bad name. But the fact is, children are naturally inclined towards copy work anyway, and they build stamina. See, writing on paper is a skill, and it requires stamina the way playing basketball or playing a piece of music, right? It just requires the ability to keep going and not get tired too quickly. And so when kids are, disciplining their fingers and their eyes and their brain and their body, they're building stamina. And that copy work is just like, running laps or doing sit-ups. It's not what you want to do in the end, but it will build the strength to give you the ability to do what you want to do in the end. Does that make sense? My son did the book of Knights and Medieval Weaponry. I think he chose that because he knew he was going to need a little respite now and then. So he could copy a sentence and then look at a battle axe and restore his soul. And then he could copy another sentence and see a lance, And so, but it was really good for him. And he's probably one of the most dyslexic people I've ever met. I'm not even sure he could read what he was copying, but he was building the stamina and the discipline. And we set up a motivational system so he could earn points towards what he wanted, try and shift it from being a chore to be argued and avoided to a challenge to be accomplished. So those two things, build the stamina, then take turns, and I think you'll see in a relatively short period of time, she'll just move past that and it won't be a problem anymore. Good. Nice question. Yes, Thelma.
I noticed that we read the source text before we started the outlining process. What do you do when you have an older student, say in high school, and they have a lot to take notes from? How much do they read before they begin note-taking?
Good question. What we're doing here in Unit 1 and 2, is very specific to setting the pattern that we will then modify as we go through the later units. And so you probably would never want a high school student to do a keyword outline of every sentence in a long source text. That would be too tedious and probably not actually useful. But if you can kind of hold that question, and when we get to Unit 4, right, think about, now we're not going to use every sentence. We're going to look for the interesting, important, or relevant facts and take keywords from those facts. That will enable students to deal with, especially at the high school level, longer material that's just more voluminous. Good. Yes, Janet.
With that in mind then, what is a good length for Units 1 and 2? Is length what matters when you're looking at source text, or something else matter?
Well, if you look at the samples that we provided, page 24 and 25, you'll see one was kind of a longer paragraph, another was 3 short paragraphs, the next one was an Aesop fable, the next one was quite a long paragraph of 12 sentences. So that's kind of the range. One thing that I have found about children and teaching writing is that they seem to like more frequent, shorter assignments. I mean, what do children most enjoy about schoolwork? Being finished. That's what's enjoyable. I did it. I'm finished. And if you do more frequent, shorter assignments, then you get to be finished more often. So life is better. I think it's also handy for the teacher because you can kind of have a big, huge, long assignment, kind of explain it, people start doing it, and then it becomes evident they really didn't understand, and you've used a lot of time to discover that they haven't understood, and it's hard to reteach that, or you run out of time. Whereas if you have a small version of that, and you do it, and then you can reteach, and do it again, and you can reteach several times more easily. So it provides a shorter feedback loop. So I tend to favor shorter assignments, but of course, as kids get into high school, longer assignments are necessary because they have to be prepared for many page papers, etc. But in terms of just Unit 1 and 2, I think 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, something in this range works very nicely. Good enough? All right, yes, in the back.
If you've completed Unit 1 and 2, and you move on to Unit 3, and you feel that they're struggling on Unit 3, is it best to go back to Unit 1 and 2 and review? So do you step back and review and then continue, or you just kind of let them struggle through Unit 3 and maybe they'll make it at the end?
Good question. The units are not cumulative in that you have to have mastered one to go to the other one. They're models, they're different ways of getting keywords. There are some things, for example, Unit 4 and 6, one builds on the other. But Unit 3 is very, very different, and when we get there later, I will explain to you how I explain to the children how it's different. So I would say no, don't get stuck and stay here too long. Move on to Unit 3, but don't let them struggle. Just give them as much help as possible and do it together. One of my favorite talks is the 4 deadly errors of teaching writing. And in that talk, I point out that one of those errors is withholding help. And we can so easily feel like, oh no, if I do this with them or I do this for them, I'll be helping them too much. How many of you have felt that? Oh no, I might be helping too much. I've got great news for you. It is not possible to help a child too much. You can't do it if you try. I defy you. Go out and attempt to help a child too much, and you will fail. Do you know why? They always tell you when they don't need help, right? Their whole purpose in existence is to become independent of you. So, writing is a skill. It's something that you can only learn by doing it, right? You cannot memorize a set of rules and learn a skill. Play the violin or play basketball or write well. You have to do it and do it and do it and do it, like swimming. And in a skill development context, independence is almost never the result of being left without help, being thrust too quickly into it. Independence is almost always the result of a critical mass of experience and confidence and information. Think about that idea. Sink or swim. That is the greatest misnomer you could ever apply to education. What would happen if we actually tried to teach swimming by that method? Yeah, the children would die and we'd all go to jail. How do we do that? We over-teach swimming, right? We're in the pool. Okay, you can float. Okay, you can kick. Okay, you can move your arms. Okay, you can blow your bubbles. Okay, now I'm 1 foot away from you. Swim to me. We actually do the opposite. We force them to prove their independence before we let them alone in a pool, right? So you can help a child and help a child and help a child and help a child, but at some point they will say, okay, Mom, I got it. Okay, please leave me alone. I can do this now. It's just frustrating that it doesn't happen until they're 22. Is that sufficient? Good. Right there. Tina, is it? Trisha.
When reproducing the keyword outline, when you go to writing your actual composition, is it important for students to write every single sentence of the keyword outline, or can they combine sentences, or is there a certain length that they have to keep their...
Oh, okay, good question. Yeah, we're actually going to answer that in the demonstration we do a little bit later, but very good. Just because the original had 7 sentences doesn't mean our version has to have 7 sentences. So yes, we might